Welcome to Impact at Work, a special VMJ pod series with Jo Vohland and me, David Macciocca. Each week we explore how talent leaders are defining the future of work, not by speed or output, but by the real difference they make in creating meaningful impact in the workplace.
Welcome to the VMJ pod. We're discussing impact at work, and I'm very excited and have a lot of energy for this next episode. I'm David Macciocca.
And I'm Jo Vohland.
And today we have with me,
Alastair, one of Australia's really leading voices in the space of talent technology. You're currently with Randstad, and I know that that is probably opening your world up to the more global space around AI and global talent teams. So David and I wanted to talk to you today about impact at work through AI to help the talent leaders tuning in really understand how this space is changing and moving, not just from available technology, but also from how internal organisations are getting AI ready and preparedness, and what they should be focused on to help navigate through what's happening. Do you want to give us a little bit of a lay of the land on where the space is at the moment and where talent leaders should be, connecting and tuning in?
Sure. So look, first, thanks for having me on the pod. It's great to be here. And for your listeners who may not know me more broadly, so I work for Randstad Enterprise, which is the outsourcing side of the Randstad business. As a business, we're about 42,000 staff strong. So we're a big global business. We're probably the largest in the HR and talent space. And I think on the outsourcing world, what it affords us the opportunity of is to see perspective, both in terms of how our current programs are adopting new ways of working, particularly through the pressure around adoption and injection of AI, but also ourselves as well. I think as an industry, the recruitment space and the staffing space in particular is ripe for change and need to embrace change. And I'll use that word quite explicitly because I think everyone's focused on AI, but really it's change, that's actually flowing through. So it's a big area of discussion. I mean, I've worked in this space for 25 years now in HR tech, and I think the impact areas are quite varied. And so I think we can explore this, and I'll very much make a couple of comments, but I think let's actually riff it out a little bit and see where we go in some of these rabbit holes. But I think on the impact areas, there is a extensive amount of board level and C-level sponsorship to push efficiency gain and cost reduction through AI at the moment, which is actually not bearing a huge amount of fruit.
Why
currently.
is that? Why do you say that?
Because it's lacking strategy. So I think at the moment there is a very much push to go fast and experiment quick, but not with a lot of focus around where is it actually impacting from what the business strategy is or where they're trying to take the organization. So it's looking at pain points that are more process focused, and largely it's administratively process focused. That's seen as the low hanging fruit impact areas. But the actual on the ground impact that a lot of organizations that we work with are seeing around the world is it's not having a huge amount of impact that they would have thought that it was actually going to have. And I think the main reasons for that is that most people in the organization aren't necessarily connected or aware with how it's going to genuinely impact where the business is trying to go. So it's seen as little short incremental experiments as opposed to connecting to the business strategy to say, this is where we want to go and this is how we want to get there. And actually to get there, we need to reimagine the way in which we're actually doing that work and potentially reimagine the construct of the workforce that we've got by which to do that work as well. So I think they're the struggles that we're seeing currently across organizations. But there are, examples out there where there is positive gains occurring. I do think though that where a lot of the challenge of the expectation of impact is, and maybe that's the best way of framing it, people expect there to be a high level of impact and an immediate high level of impact. But the reality is quite different on the ground. I think it's taking time to adopt it into the way in which they work, but also, depending upon how it's being pointed, to get the results that you're otherwise expecting perfection out of the gate from. Let me give you an example from a conversation I had this morning with actually our internal IT team, actually. Sorry, not our internal IT team, our internal talent acquisition team. They're called ITA. That's why I got confused on the IT piece. But we are a deep partner of LinkedIn's. So we are one of their early stage, what we call Beacon partner with their new LinkedIn hiring assistant. And so we are currently working with them from a global perspective, working with their AI assistant and the algorithms behind that to help train those models around what good looks like and providing immediate feedback so they can make those changes. In speaking with the team this morning, I'm actually hiring for a role as we speak right now, and the way in which they are used to searching through LinkedIn, they're having to retrain the way in which they think about how to interact and how to search. But more importantly, changing the level of expectation around what the results are that come back in the first three results, like the first three reattempts of that.
Because they're not quite
because
right.
they don't meet the expectation of what you would otherwise have done as your initial searching approach. I've got a perfect example of I know what good looks like.
Right.
But when you're handing the reins to the AI doesn't really know exactly what good looks like yet. It needs to work alongside you through additional interaction and feedback to improve that and thereby have a better impact and a more quicker state.
Do you think there's an expectation from the human thinking that it's the silver bullet that will solve the problem?
Yeah. And I think there's probably a couple of levels of human there. I think the C level expect that it's a silver bullet.
Well, I can see from sea level, like they're thinking, well, this is a huge efficiency gain. An AI could replace humans as well. There are even in like a CFO under their line item, they've got an RPA spend, which is very, very different to you've got your cost of a human and then introducing AI and so I can see from a business perspective, the reason why they feel like they want to get the business more involved.
Well, let me give you that CFO is a really interesting example, right? So there's businesses that we've worked with where the CFOs have looked at the budget for the year and have actually put in a 20% efficiency gain directly into the budget and saying, well, we'll just put AI into there. But we'll literally budget it as 20% gain or 25% gain or 30% gain.
Yeah.
But with not a lot of strategy around how we intend to get there and not enough thought through of actually, well, how long will it take us to get there? So there's this expectation that, we plug the AI in and then boom, 20%, 30% gain immediately.
They want to flick a switch and just have it work. But I think what I've seen in like the state of talent surveys that I've done over the last few years and specifically looking at, talent technology and applicant tracking systems, when I ask organisations to tell us, who you're using and, on a 10-point rating scale, how that product delivers for you, I see time and time again that the same product is graded as a 2 out of 10 by one organisation and a 9 out of 10 by another organisation. And I think part of that is not just accepting the marketing on the box or not taking the fact that somebody else gave a reference and said, it's great in my individual context. But do you think that it's also about how much effort and time and money they put into proper configuration and deployment of the product?
Yeah, I think that's a really astute point. So a couple of thoughts on that, and I want to pull on a couple of examples. So come back to your earlier comment, Dave, around silver bullet. There's a great digital equation for success that the guys down at Mercer, Jason Aberbrook in particular, was really out to market talking a lot about over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, which is that if you look at the technology percentage of what a digital equation for success looks like, and what I mean by that is if you put in technology, how likely are you to get the expectation of the outputs that you bought, right? So you've been sold the dream, but then the reality of what you end up getting is quite different. So technology represents only 10% of that equation of success. Putting in the technology will only result in around about a 10% gain around the expectations of what you're trying to get. The other dimensions of those are mindset, which is about 35% of that equation for success, people, which is about 30%. And when I say mindset, is the business ready to even go on this journey? How prepared are you to back this in? So it's great to have the chairman say it, it's great to have the C-level say it, but how far through the business, are they actually ready to go that? There's going to be mindset levels that are willing and ready to go, but then other areas of the business that just are not. They are full-on resistant.
I can absolutely relate to that because at Video My Job, we're communicating the value of our AI that we've built. And sometimes we have the person in the room that our AI is basically making redundant. It is creating a lot of efficiencies for that particular person. Let's call them a content creator. And it's threatening. It's a real threat to people who do a role because it creates an enormous amount of efficiency. So there would be pushback.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting comment. I'll come back to the other percentages, but I want to pick up on that particular point, Dave, because we've spent a lot of time looking at this, and there's a lot of commentary and narrative out there in the market about the fact that, well, we don't need that role anymore. The AI can do that role. Yeah, theoretically, yeah, physically, yeah, but it still has to be trained. It still has to be monitored. It still has to be improved. So, and we're seeing where the actual reality of adoption and impact is actually acting as an assistant to sit alongside you. It's no different to the mathematician with a calculator, right? So it's a way in which you can become better and more productive at scale faster to get to results faster. And actually what you can look at is, how do I get a 5x output from my person with something that can actually support them around that? So
they could be doing other things with their time.
100%. So there's other things, or we can just get more done, right? We can push more out.
Correct.
There's more output that we can generate as a result of that. If you look at through the history of the last 100 years and just in terms of technological advancement, there has been disruption. Yes, there are workers that we don't need lamplighters anymore, right? With the advent of electricity and street lights, that job is no longer existent. But it's essentially pushed both economies and organisations forward to grow and then move into different areas that they hadn't otherwise thought of. So I think there's a growth opportunity there. But that's a classic just around mindset again, which is how are you framing what you wanted to do and the impact areas you wanted to focus on? And that shapes short-term, medium-term, long-term strategy, which is why I'll come back to that point around strategy. Again, if you don't have a strategy and your mindset's not right, you're never going to get the buy-in at the people or the process level. And they're the other two dimensions. So people, that's the skills, the capability, the willingness to actually adopt it. That's about 30% of the success equation as well. And so you need to make sure that the people know what to do. We're a Google house at Randstad. We've activated Gemini for every single person in the organization with every single product that we've got across the entire Google suite. I spent this morning, I uploaded a 38-page document of a whole bunch of 2 years worth of research notes from a few colleagues internally, and then listened to that as a podcast through Notebook LM while I was walking the dog this morning.
Lovely.
And so that's just a classic. I could have spent 5 hours reading a Word document, of which, by the way, I'm not a great reader. I don't like having to spend 5 hours reading that. I would much rather spend 27 minutes, which is what the podcast was, listening to that whilst walking the dog and getting everything summarized. So that's helped me get information really quickly without, wasting my time. So I can continue to get on to do more. But knowing how to do that is one part of that equation. And then the willingness by which to want to do that is another part of the equation. I've got access to it. Everyone's got access to it. Is everyone using it? Hell no. Does everyone know how to use it? Hell no.
Yeah. So they're walking around with a candle and you're flicking switches, Al.
Well, yeah, and I would argue, I've sat up on presentations with clients, over in Europe recently, and I get introduced as AI Al, but there are so many people who are it's only because my name sounds like AI, but it's only because I am passionate about this area, but I'm a pragmatist associated to it as well. I'm optimistic about it, but I'm pragmatic in the context of how it can actually work and what it impacts on. And then the other dimension that is it's a process dimension, right? They're about 25% of the equation. And that is a case of saying, if you haven't weaved it into the way in which you do your work, and then reimagining or re-changing the way in which you look at your processes, once again, you're not going to get the impact and outputs. So Jo, to come back to your question around, we buy these pieces of tech, we get sold the dream. I mean, gosh, in the last 12 months alone in the US, there has been over 1,200 new AI-related technologies that have been launched in the talent acquisition space alone. And that's just in the US, right? So there is spectacular amounts of noise, and they're all operating in very similar spheres, just with slightly different flavors or slightly different colors, but they're all drawing off the same LLM basis, right? So, so it's bloody confusing for customers and for companies more generally. It's exciting because we're constantly looking at how do we change and innovate, and everyone's trying to solve, different point solutions. So one part is we get sold the dream, but the issue isn't necessarily a configuration issue. It's potentially, if anything, more of a design issue. So have we thought about the design of where it's going to play a role, why it's playing that role, the purpose of where it's going to have impact, and then have we thought through what needs to evolve and change with what else we've got to essentially get the outcome that we're after?
I love how you're stepping back, or you're asking or suggesting people step back and just take a look at what's in front of them instead of rushing into it, because it does look very alluring, doesn't it, to insert AI to create some efficiencies. And some companies are getting pushed as well because C-suite are pushing. Can you give us an example where it possibly went wrong for a business because they did go too quick? Please don't name any names.
No. That's okay. Well, there's a reasonably fresh one, actually. I was over in Amsterdam about 6-8 weeks ago working with a customer over there, and they had rolled out a very advanced AI solution. This is their talent acquisition and talent function. To give you a sense of their infrastructure, they are a Workday house. They've got a CRM solution, as well in Avature, but they're using Avature also from an ATS perspective. It's all working really well. They've got about another dozen or so different TA technologies they're using for point solutions. But their problem statement was, we need to improve the way we do AI matching. And so they ended up buying I won't say who the technology was, but they ended up buying more of a platform solution that had really strong AI matching capability and a lot of sort of talent intelligence with part of that product as well. So I think what they've done is they've put that in and they've said, cool, we've got a solution that does that now. They've integrated it kinda, but not really. And then 12 months down the track, they're ripping it out. And they're saying, didn't work. Nah, it's terrible. Nah, it's just no good. And honestly, that's got nothing to do with the tech. The tech's a really, really good platform. It's just that they've designed it really poorly into their process, and they've not thought about the role that each of the other technologies are playing. And the result of that is essentially they've gone, actually, you know what? You're absolutely right. We screwed that up. We didn't think through that properly in terms of how it would work in the context of everything else we've got. Is it going to complement or is it going to replace something in terms of where we've got? And also, where are people spending their time to do their work? So we're asking them to jump around all these other different things, and actually as a result of us throwing new toys at them, they're actually becoming less efficient as a result of it. So we get the promise of efficiency through AI, but by introducing more and more noise into the equation, i.e. more products, they're spending more and more time jumping around between platforms, and then you've got data and insight sitting across multiple platforms, and where am I making decisions and how am I driving process and what is going to be the experience impact in the context of a hiring manager or a candidate or an internal talent or HR. And so they're now stepping back and around that, and they're going, you know what? We actually need to get our data right. So even before we decide to go down this pathway of injecting lots of new AI capability, if we haven't got our data structured in a right way to allow us to leapfrog into largely what would be a more of an agentic approach into the future, they're going to be still kicking the can down the road for another 5 years.
So it's not a case of don't do it, because
No.
I very much believe there is,
Far from it.
there's a cost of doing something. There's also a cost of not doing anything. But it's just we need to take a more planned, diligent, thoughtful approach towards it. Let's overlay that now with the fact that we do have new squads emerging inside organisations. they're all called something different, but for want of a better term, an AI readiness team.
Mm-hmm.
So generally we're talking technology, perhaps people, governance. How is that going to start playing out once we have this extra layer?
Yeah, God, don't we love a governance council? This is the is this
See
the bane
everyone
of
just
is this the
tuning
bane-
out right
is this
now.
the bane of my existence?
Please hold on.
I've gone.
We're going to get more.
Strap yourself in.
We'll
for
get better.
I think that there's a couple of things here. So one is it is important to have governance. I think if we give everyone free rein to do whatever they want, then it's complete chaos and there is way too much risk around that. And I'll give you an example. I was talking to a business recently. They've put in place a policy internally from the large language models that they're allowing people to use from an internal organisation perspective. And they've done that as an enterprise solution, and mainly because it can be contained in relation to the data that they feed into that machine. And it's not feeding out to the wider sort of models from that regard. Yet people are still, signing up to ChatGPT and uploading documentation and say, oh no, because it's better. But the problem is they're just not aware of the implications or what the risk is in relation to doing that. So I think you do need governance. You do need oversight in relation to that. The challenge with that is that we are in a world where we're still learning at pace and we still don't really know. A lot of it's theoretical. Like we kind of think that it's a bit like this. A lot of it's philosophical. Like we just believe that it's the wrong thing to do or we believe it's the right thing to do. And all those things are really important dimensions to consider. The bigger question here is how much time do you want to spend in that washing machine of the council coming together and having meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting with no decision? And that's what stifles innovation. So I think there is this overlay coming back to the strategy part, is that if you're clear on what you're trying to go after and how you want to go after that, and you develop a focus and a plan around it, you can rally the squads to be more considerate, focused, and more decisive. And it's the decisiveness part that is actually becoming really challenging. So obviously I've got the benefit and challenge. I've had lots of early meetings this morning, lots of late night meetings last night, but the US are moving with a lot more freedom. The Emirates are moving with a lot more freedom. They're essentially saying, right, experiment, do it in a controlled fashion. We need to know where you're looking to do it, but we need to give you freedom by which to experiment, to give us feedback around what's working, where is it having impact. Europe are taking a lot more of a harder policy-related stance to say, no. It's got to go through this data review. It's got to go through this sort of ethical review. It's got to go through this policy review. So it's review. And in some cases, this is for a vendor of which the cost of that vendor is probably $20,000 over the year for a point solution. It's like, really?
Gotta love procurement.
Gotta love procurement, right? So I was on a procurement steerco last night. It was wonderful. But that is the challenge. I think this is where there's a regional overlay. And this is not about saying we shouldn't have it. I think it is required. I would argue that we just shouldn't over-index in an area where we're still learning at the moment.
I pick up on a point that you mentioned a little earlier where you rolled out one type of AI within an organization. It would be nice for a business to take a stance. I like the idea of being AI agnostic. Doesn't matter what you use. If you've got the right AI platform, it should be agnostic, then let people use what they want to use. I know that's how we've approached it at Video My Job, that anyone can just plug in.
Yeah.
And I've seen that work really well.
Yeah.
And I would agree with you. It seems like there's a big, America are much more forward and they're just ready to go as fast as they can. It's big investment that's happening all the time, and they want to get that efficiency gain.
Yeah, there was a for your audience, and I'm not sure if you watched it as well. A couple of days ago, they had the US Senate committee talking about AI, and there was some fascinating
fabulous.
insights.
It is better than Saturday Night Live.
Well, yeah, it's like it's
Well, the
genuinely
actors are better.
3 hours of. I don't think I'd ever say this ever in my life, that sitting there watching a Senate committee hearing for 3 hours is actually really interesting. It was genuinely
fascinating.
insightful, like genuinely insightful. Like little things where, and there's been snippets that have been posted across LinkedIn and other different channels as well. But little things like if you just purely look at the amount of power that AI processing, this is like data processing and reasoning models and everything that's behind that. Currently, it consumes about 3% of the electricity consumption in the US at the moment. They're saying in 5 years, this is 5 years, 2030, it will be about 99%.
Yeah, it's a play on energy. There's no doubt about it.
It's a play on energy, right? And so you start to look at some of what's happening from a macroeconomic, political landscape perspective, and you start to get a sense around, well, hang on, right? This is so okay, a couple of things, right? You go theoretically, absolutely. We want to move at pace. We want to move at scale. But then you need to have the infrastructure by which to support that ability by which to do so. And so there's big investment decisions that countries are needing to make. Governments are clearly needing to make. I mean, they were talking about the fact that from a nuclear power plant generation perspective, it generates about 1 gigawatt, of power. For just a data center, and some of the data centers they're talking about, they're saying it needs 10 gigawatts. It needs 10 nuclear power plants to power one data center. So once again, I think there is this world where there is the theoretical of it can change everything, but there is also this argument of, well, what needs to be in place for it to be true? And that's a good example of, well, there's actually genuine infrastructure problems that need to be in place for it to be true. And so I think that will, in some respects, dictate a little bit of the pace of change and a little bit of the pace of impact. And so part of this, coming back to the governance council's piece, is you need to be, you need to allow for experimentation and focus areas. You're probably seeing greater impact where you give more freedom and control to an area of the business and saying, right, here's your frame, go nuts. And to your point, Dave, if you make a decision, be decisive, but what you decide on needs to have enough breadth to allow for freedom. And then you say, I don't care how you use it.
Yeah, well, what are the efficiency
But let me show you
how you've gone about it, and then have a ground up as opposed to top down approach.
Well, and this where they just another sort of thought on that as well is that if you look at from a what is your strategy side, there's sort of two pathways of strategic thinking here around what you can do from it. There's a defensive strategy. And there's a offensive strategy. And so from a defensive strategy perspective, it may be about cost reduction. So we want to go, right, it's about efficiency, it's about cost reduction. We need to take heads out, we need to give it to a machine, we need to deconstruct tasks, get that work to be done there. It's more automation focused.
Where are those gains?
Yeah. Now, on the offensive side, it may be about creation of the new. So what are new business lines? How do we innovate new product development? How do we actually create a new service approach that we just have not been able to do before because we just never had a way in which we could do that? So you can see that there's two different pathways. Both are not right or not wrong, but it comes back to big decision making.
I was listening to a podcast and Jeff Bezos was on it, and he got asked, how would you describe AI? And he said it's the new electricity. And we can see that. We can clearly see that. It's probably a nice way of describing it.
This episode is brought to you by Video My Job, your go-to platform for creating branded employee videos at scale with zero editing. If you're burning time and budget producing talent content, there is a better way. Book a demo at Video My Job to see how teams like yours are creating hundreds of employee videos without editing a single thing.
Where do you think the biggest efficiency gains are within talent teams?
Yeah, so
it's probably quite a few.
Yeah, no, there is.
What are the ones that are obvious?
Well, I suppose let's divide talent teams into two parts of the equation. One, which is the talent acquisition side, so the hiring, finding and hiring side, and the other, which is talent development. I think there's three big areas really within talent acquisition, which is about the sourcing, the screening, and the scheduling. They're really the three big impact areas that people are pointing AI at. The sourcing part's an interesting one. We're working around this at the moment, and part of it's the finding piece. Like we've got so many mechanisms in which you can find people now. Finding people isn't that hard. Finding the right people in the fastest way and the most impactful way is where the science comes into it. But you need to couple sourcing with engagement as well. So just because you find them doesn't mean that they're going to want to talk to you.
That's right.
Yeah. And so the overlay of conversational AI into that to enable that at scale, how do I reach out to as many people as possible, have a contextual conversation, make it conversationally or more human feel, is going to have a better impact cut through on a conversion rate to actually say, right, here's some people we think would be good for this job. Then I dive deeper. Are they the right fit? And then, okay, well, how do I actually get rid of the admin of scheduling and give that to the AI to manage all of that? So in TA, they're the kind of the three areas. I would add a fourth to that, which is actually about, and which is connected to talent development, which is about market-related insight, demand, supply. You know, if we can think about before we decide to go out and hire this role, like what are we facing into at the moment? And is what we're looking to hire actually the right thing? And, you know, are these purple squirrels even available out there in the market? And if I'm only paying 200 grand for this, but I mean, I was talking to a founder of an agentic AI business back in London on January. He's interviewing candidates at the moment. He's having to offer people $650,000, you know, to get them out of a business as a base, like just as a starting point. He's saying, I'm going to have to potentially increase that to $1 million. So there, for the right people, just even that knowledge, like the construct of how you were thinking about what a REM should look like and what you're needing to do in a competitive space right here, right now, is very different. So
it doesn't sound like a purple squirrel. That sounds like a unicorn.
Well, a purple squirrel with a unicorn horn, maybe. Can
I throw another one?
Yeah.
From my perspective, because I've got the lens, I do think there's a huge gap in the marketing side of that AI can create some serious efficiency gains for. So the attraction piece. I think that's a really interesting space, and it's really changing because marketing are really adopting AI to create efficiency gains, and attraction teams, unfortunately, they're always a step behind what these really big complex marketing teams are doing.
Yeah, I think it's an astute point there, Dave. I think the only comment I would make on that one, and you're much better placed than that than I am, but I think the AI opportunity around that is more about the identification of signals, which is buying signals, right? No different to in consumer marketing. So content creation, you know, fine, but that's not overly differentiated. But I think the ability to understand signals. So when is a buying signal? When is a change signal?
How to communicate?
You know, and then hyper personalizing that communication. So it feels like, oh my God, how did you know that I was looking for something?
Yeah.
How did you know I was looking to buy a house? How did you know I was looking to change a job?
I was just looking at these
correct.
shoes and they just popped up.
I know, exactly right. Like, how did you know I was going to want to buy that? So, so those things I think absolutely need to flow through and are beginning to flow through. But that comes back to the point of data. Like if the data isn't right and the data isn't accessible, then it's going to be really hard to, you could infer signals, but it's still going to be surface level, you know, in relation to that. So that's kind of just some of the impact areas on TA.
It's funny, I've seen some people in talent on private socials, so Instagram and Facebook, share some memes that would maybe suggest that they're having a bit of a tough time with some stakeholders at work. So I can imagine a tool picking that up and then targeting them for a new role. Yeah. Could quite be timely. It's like, you know, when people put the open to work signal up.
Yep.
So it's about knowing they're open to work without them having that banner up, right? And picking up on those signals. Can I ask you a question? We were talking earlier about the big salaries that, you know, agentic AI experts can demand, and some of that also seems larger than some of the salaries that CEOs are earning and, you know, the Prime Minister's earning. But I'm interested to know what your take is in relation to the composition of boards. Because if you have a think about the current composition of boards of some of the major organisations in Australia, we have legal expertise, we have finance expertise and strategy expertise and so forth. if AI is the new electricity, I mean, is that missing from our board composition, or can we just be reliant on strategy teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have an opinion on that, but I would say that I'm not an expert on this. But I would probably come back to what's the purpose of the board? The purpose of the board is actually risk and governance. I mean, really, if you kind of look at what they're there, they're the umpire around, okay, well, are you guys doing the right thing? Are we making the right decisions as a business? They're not actually there to play the role of innovation. Now, you could counter argue that to say, well, what would be the risk of us not doing anything about this?
Yeah.
Like, is this a game of survival now? And I actually don't think that boards are ballsy enough to ask themselves those questions. Some are, absolutely some are. But I reckon they're few and far between. I think that to your point, they're legally focused, they're finance focused. It's a risk and governance related conversation. It's the the third umpire gatekeeper discussion as opposed to the disruptor conversation. I think they're raising the question, but they're not prepared to back it in the right way.
But the disruption, because none of the major organisations in Australia right now are AI first, right? Everybody's at adoption level. How do we take this big beast of what we already do and try and point it towards this new direction? The big disruptor are the AI first organisations that are being created that are be able to come in and be AI first. And so I think that's a huge disruption point. And I saw this question posed on LinkedIn the other day about, what is an AI native, right? Because, we're familiar with the term digital natives. Do you have a view on this AI native individual or an AI native organisation?
Yeah, I think that you would probably argue, and history would show this, is that anything that has got some level of context of native have to have come in at a very, very early stage and it be their current norm. And so clearly the generational overlay to that is the classic. So my kids coming through who are exposed to all of these things embedded within their worlds. My daughter had a whole bunch of friends around having pizza and they had their Snapchat AI and they were just talking to their AI on Snapchat and then talking to each other about what their AI was talking about.
Yeah.
So it's in their face, it's the norm, it's kind of embedded within their world. So I think at an AI native perspective, it would be those who come in and it's just what the nature of their current world level of expectation.
Yeah,
they don't have reference to
I think my son was
previous.
probably 3 or 4 when he started saying, "Hey Google."
Sure.
And and so an AI native individual. Now, if we talk about organizations, I think the existing ones can only hope to be AI centric, right? Versus the new ones that are being created that will be AI native. And I think that's from a disruption perspective or an AI enabled.
Yeah, and I think this is the challenge that businesses that have been around for a while is when you are so let's look at an example. Seek. Now I'm ex-Seeker, going back a long time ago now, but if you look at how you generate revenue as a business, you need to, and you're a publicly listed business with quarterly level of expectations of what you have to produce reports on. The market's wanting to see what you do around AI, but you can't snap and go full native on one thing. That essentially means you having a direct impact to revenue and profit for a period of time. Now, the upside of that might be huge, but it's what are you prepared, to communicate to the market, how much hit are you prepared to wear in the short term while we're still trying to prove that out in the right way. And when you're big scale global impact, it touches so many things. So there's a lot of requirement to think through those in the appropriate way and test those out, experiment in the right way. Now, Seeker have already had experience around showing that they can disrupt themselves and then they can innovate and evolve into other categories. So maybe they're not the best of examples relative to a 50-year-old business, for example. But others may have a different opinion on that. But I think the businesses that are trying to change to become more AI enabled or AI driven come back to that digital equation success. They need the right mindset to go on that journey, the willingness to actually change as well. and then just backing in and getting it done, and not just having lots of councils and meetings and committees and not finding that they're transforming in the right way, because it is a transformation journey. I mean, Telstra has been a good example of that, moving towards a digital transformation approach away from that of a telecommunications business. And I think they've done a really, really good job on that. So is the move towards an AI their next transformation from that side? Yeah, but is it all in on that? Maybe, but maybe it's not on everything. And I think they're the decisions that businesses need to think through.
It's a different world, isn't it? And it's moving quickly. There's so many different efficiency gains that could be created. You just mentioned kids, and my kids are using AI at school. My son is sitting a CT, and he ran out of practice questions for his algebra test. So he asked ChatGPT. He uploaded some example questions, and then ChatGPT have given even more questions.
Yeah.
And then when he got stuck, he said, "How do I figure this out?" And then they explained it to him. It's pretty fascinating, the efficiency gains that you could use personally, but also like the disruption across all sectors, education, legal as well.
Yeah.
Like the legal industry have been using a form of AI for a while and you can just see the efficiency gains, and HR tech or procurement, not procurement, but like talent attraction. You can just see there's plenty of opportunities.
Yeah.
Plenty.
Can I maybe pick up on a point there, because I get a lot of this conversation internally in our organisation. I think when businesses are thinking about AI, the frame in which, and this comes back to a point I was making earlier, the frame in which they're looking at what they're trying to either one, measure, or two, impact on, there are different dimensions to that. So efficiency is where a lot of people are talking about that, but it may not necessarily be the main game. Quality may be another dimension to that as well, right? We talked about it before, which is innovation and ideation, the creativity, of something as well. So I think in a world where we're at the moment, where particularly in our sector, there is a do more with less pressure. So therefore, the logical shift of focus and time and effort is on efficiency gain or cost reduction because of do more with less. But I'm a big proponent of what's the quality uplift. So I'll come back to your example with your, I think it was your son, wasn't it, you were referring to? My daughter's the same, actually. By the way, when the hell did they change math? I don't remember math being this hard as a kid.
They do make it harder.
Maybe I just didn't care about it. Maybe I didn't care about it as much.
I am married to a math teacher.
My God, really?
And
please ask him. Yeah, why did they change math?
Can I just say that the math talk I hear now, I have to. It's like, I think maybe a legal requirement of me as a partner to, I'm hearing more math now than I did at high school.
Yeah.
Because high school I had the opportunity to tune out. I only had that teacher for that year and then move on.
Yeah, exactly right.
Now I'm legally obliged to actually care.
Contractually obliged under marriage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what I was going to say is that my daughter, very similar, she came to me a couple of days ago and she was working through a math problem around probability. And I looked at her like, oh man, I can't figure that out. I'm super tired. Like, I'd love to help you, honey. She's like, can I just use ChatGPT? And I said, yeah, go for it. So she took a photo of it, loaded it, bang, gave her the answer. I said, okay, well, what are you going to do with that answer? I was like, do you understand how it got to that answer? And where she went to logically next was, it's a really good question. So she started talking to the AI to understand the reasoning and how they got to that. And then okay, well, what if we did it this way and what if we did it that way? So to come back to that point around it being an assistant or being a concierge or a coach or whatever it might be, that you can sit there and interact with to improve your own knowledge and capability helps increase the bench level of quality. I had a presentation to one of the world's largest global tech businesses, and their concern was around candidates using AI, but using AI as a cheating mechanism. And they explicitly said, how do we stop candidates from cheating with AI?
Meet them face to face.
Well,
it depends what you define as cheating, right? because I think if somebody has cared enough
To cheat.
to you know, if they can, but is it cheating or is it a tool,
Well-
right? So if you're misrepresenting yourself, it's cheating.
Yeah.
But if in my work environment, my expectation is that my team are going to be utilizing those tools to produce better work, why wouldn't
Yep.
you want to see that evidence that they can produce the highest quality job application?
Yeah.
What if the AI is actually an avatar and it's not a real person talking? You really push off into different directions.
There is examples of that, right? So, you know, there's deep fake examples recently that I've seen this week where, you know, there was a person sitting there on camera and then he changed his entire face to look like Robert Downey Jr., but his movement was so natural. And not just that, he actually got a torch and shone the torch against his face, and it was still against Robert Downey's face.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard
And
to tell the difference
it wasn't
between
a torch,
reality
it
and
was a cucumber, and he just said, make it look like a torch.
yeah, exactly right. Rub it on my face. Now we're getting weird. But I think this piece, I asked that question explicitly because I think, you know, I believe on both sides of the discussion, but I'm a big proponent of, you know, if the way in which we're using AI allows us to be a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario.
Yeah.
And so trying to focus in on that as opposed to you shouldn't be using that, you know, in this process. I think you can meet them face to face. Yep. But I think coming back to, and I've talked to a lot of businesses about the way in which organizations can or are responding to this concept of candidates or people using AI, is they're taking a 3Ds approach to that problem, which is they can either deter them from using it, detect whether they're using it, or design it into how they can use it.
Yeah.
And the deterrence part is purely at even in our world in recruitment, it's kind of going, well, let's just put it in there as an application question, in there as a policy to say, if you use it, we will not consider your application. Or we need you to essentially say explicitly that you will not use AI at any point throughout this entire process.
See, if we come back to the name of this podcast, Impact at Work, right? In terms of you being able to make impact at work, and what we're saying is in our everyday work day, we want 1 + 1 = 3. We want people who will use these tools to create and produce work. I don't see the point in cutting it out of.
No.
I mean, if all it's telling me is you're able to arrive at a really amazing outcome.
Yeah.
How you arrive there, I don't care. It'd be like saying to an accountant, you know, I'm going to take all of your spreadsheets and your calculators away, and you need to prove to me that you can do this with no tools.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
It's a great argument. It's so true. I think, and I absolutely agree that's with that scenario.
I'm looking at the look on your face,
Well,
though, and I'm not quite sure.
No, well, I do.
I feel
Like
there's
today,
a
I
big but
agree. Well,
coming.
I just don't know what the future holds, really.
Yeah.
Like, you know, fast forward 12 months or 24 months, and what if that one person is going for like 4 jobs, and they're securing 4 jobs, and they've got like an avatar that's doing 4 jobs? You know, you just don't know.
Yeah. But I think there's other things you can do, surely, wouldn't you agree, Al, that, you know, within your contracts and agreements that you have to declare if you have other jobs or revenue streams, like.
Yeah, but I think we look, I think we just need to accept the reality that things are going to be different.
Yeah.
And who cares if you've got 4 jobs? I mean, if you're getting the work done effectively, and this is
if
where
you're making impact
all right,
at work.
So this is where, you know, if you look at, and I'll just look at a classic example, and I'll say this only in the context of my wife. When she returned back to work after maternity leave, she was working 3 days a week. I reckon she was producing more in 3 days a week than what a 5 to 6 day a week person would have been doing, because she was more motivated, more focused. She knew her capability. I was going to swear there for a second. She knew her capability, and she was able to actually get that quality of output driven really, really quickly. So, and she could have done another job 2 days a week doing something else somewhere else. But as an employer, if you're getting the quality and the impact from what you're bringing in, and then if I can add in another assistant to sit alongside that person, and let's say, you know, and this is AI in this context, and I've said this to a few businesses recently. If you think about AI as an assistant and how you introduce it initially, it's like you're giving them an intern to actually come and help you out. But then in about 3 weeks, or maybe not even 3 weeks, maybe in 1 week, that intern is now MBA qualified. And then a week after that, that intern is now a 10-year-old veteran. You're getting great level of quality and insight and recommendation and advice and support to continue to look at 3x, 5x, 10x, what you can do and the quality that you have and the impact that you can make in your own role, but also what it can generate for the business. So, and let's look at that point around offensive versus defensive strategy. You could start to get output and impact from a defensive strategy perspective, which is efficiency, cost reduction, a whole bunch of those areas. But what if there's 20% extra time that you've now got that you can throw towards offensive, which is about innovation, new ideation, where else you could explore, then you can grow as an organization.
I think that's a really good point, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, well, that's from an employee's perspective. How are they creating efficiencies for themselves to increase their quality of work or increase their time where they can do a number of things? And I think it's a better approach than the CEO coming down and going, hey, just use AI, because it's going to create so many efficiencies, and there's going to be costs that we're going to be reducing.
Yep. I mean, you could take it a step further to say, well, let's start to introduce more animatronic workforce into, or humanoids into the workforce at the same time as well. So we still have an element of the physical, the robotics part of it. We've got the brain in terms of the LLMs and the intelligence sitting in there from those. And then they're performing more tasks as part of that, and then we're freed up to be more of the human relationship builder, the more the critical thinker, the more the wider problem solver. But if we and I'll look at there was a classic meme that went around recently based off all of the tariffs that were done by the US government, and it was kind of looking at, well, if they can't get their sneakers made or their shirts made over in China, then it's all going to have to be done manufacturing wise in the US. And so they had all these memes and AI created images of what those US workers would look like, and more specifically about the fact that they don't want to do that work. Like, they just don't want to do it. It happened in the UK when they started to change where particularly for I think it was Polish people. There's like hundreds of thousands of Polish people coming into the UK to do a lot of labour work, so bricklaying and carpentry work or whatever it might be, but other menial tasks as well. And then they all started to go back home because I think it was changes around their immigration policies. And then the government was saying, but we're going to get more jobs back to all the people in the UK. They can do all this sort of work. And the UK people are going, but I don't want to do that work. I really don't want to clean toilets. I really don't want to lay bricks. I just want to stay at home and play my video games all day. So I think this part around you can create the opportunities more about the willingness to want to do it. And so if you can, once again, pass this across to other agents, AI, humanoids, whatever it might be, I think you're going to see organizations thrive and grow, but we do want to keep coming back to what is the role that humans need to play and the role that humans can have impact around. And I think that's the job of government, to make sure that they're focused in on that. Their role as a function in a lot of respects and as an entity is to look after their citizens. And so that's, I think, some of the Europe particularly are focused very heavily around that at the moment. Yeah. What is going to be the impact to our citizens?
Regulate. Yeah, absolutely.
Protect our citizens. Like, how do we protect our citizens? So, and they're super aware and mindful of that. Yeah. So there's a lot.
So what I'm hearing is, if a CEO is pushing down, the horse needs to be before the cart, and they have to have their data lake sorted, which is a big project within itself, so they can make the right decisions. You were advocating for that at the start.
Definitely, yeah. And that is not about you saying, sorry, that's not an organisation saying, right, do nothing until you have that done.
Yeah.
I don't think businesses can afford to do that.
It's more like get to know yourself before you make that step forward.
Well,
to really
the bigger point here is
which,
if you want to scale it and have the broader organizational impact, getting your data together is going to enable that and a more secure environment. And I'll give you just a point in relation to this. Everyone's talking about agents at the moment. There's this movement towards agentic AI. It's the new generative AI discussion out there in the market, right? Everyone's agents. I was at a dinner in London back in January, and there was an expert from IBM there, or his ex-IBM, and he was talking about the fact, and I love this analogy. He was talking about the fact that agentic AI, in terms of what it can do, and this is largely about how do we use our both our generative AI chat overlay with our reasoning models behind the scenes to actually perform tasks and work and interact with each other to make good decisions, to get work and tasks completed. But he described it that agentic AI essentially is the brain, but it's lacking the fingers and the eyes right now. And what he meant by that is that they're super smart because they're well trained. We can train them when we've got these deep large language models behind it, and the algorithms are really smart, and they're getting smarter and smarter and smarter all the time. But if they can't go in and get information, that's the fingers going into other platforms, looking at the data. If the data isn't structured in a way that actually allows them, they can work with unstructured data, but if it can't get the access it needs, which is where the API discussion starts to come into it as well, which is how open will platforms be to allow for access to that data, and how protected will businesses want to be around the access to that. Comes back to a risk, question again. That's the fingers part. The eyes is if you want an agent to play the role that a human would otherwise have done, and the simplest example is that if you were to go online and fill in an online web form, an agent can't read that screen at the moment. Now, it can look at fields and potentially, write some language in relation to that, but it can't see the sequence of the fields and actually what needs to be dropped down, selected, etc., things like that there at the as a web form that you would need to fill out for a school application.
Yeah, it's like they're basically building prompts. They're prompting. That's effectively how these engineers are building AI that's sitting behind the scene.
Yeah, well, from a generative side, yes, but then it's largely about it's a reasoning model associated to automation is largely how the agents are working there at the moment. And automations is sitting behind the scenes, processing. But if we're wanting it to act as a human, i.e. like an agent in this concept of what everyone's talking about, it requires fingers and eyes.
Yeah, I totally get it.
And it doesn't have it at the moment. Will it? Absolutely. But there are things that need to be in place for it to be true. And so, technology systems there's APIs, right? You can build APIs and you can open up your systems more. It's more about a willingness by which to do so. And so I think that there's going to be pressure on software vendors and platforms in particular where the data is stored by which to allow access to that. But the bigger question is whether the organization who actually has bought the software would allow for another software to access, in inverted commas, their data. And this is where risk comes into how they're looking to actually manage that. So there's the promise of what agents and AI can do, but it comes back to, once again, the organizational risk and governance part there around what are they prepared to allow for access to have.
Right.
So, and that's the challenges that not a lot of people talk about or think about in the market, is that there's the promise of, yes, it can do this and it could take our jobs and there's a 1 + 1 = 3, but there still is things that have to be in place for it to be true. And those things pragmatically have to be worked through to allow for the impact at work that we've got the promise around. And that's where I think that there is definitely immediate impact areas you can have that are at a departmental or a team level where you allow for freedom within a frame. But if you're looking at enterprise-wide, we're working with companies that are 520,000 staff large, and they are titanics to shift and change. And if you think about just the sheer level of consultation that is required, and then you overlay that with 62 countries around the world, then these are complex businesses to try to navigate through. So there's the executives and the C-level that go, make it happen. It's where the world needs to be. But the practical reality of actually doing that at scale is bloody hard. And it takes time to get through that.
Well, it sounds like there is still plenty of opportunity for the humans of the workforce
Without a
to
doubt.
be very busy,
Without a doubt.
at least for the next decade, right?
I honestly, I think that if you just once again come back to the amount of technology we've had access to over the last 50 years, do you feel busier than you've ever been?
100%. I
Like-
think there's more opportunity than there will be less.
Yeah, it feels like we're just more busy than we've ever been, and there's just more noise. I just think that if we can get to a point where we can give the boring crap to the AI to deal with, and we can hopefully have some more enjoyment in our working lives, then hopefully we're going to have a more positive impact in what we do within work. But even then, there are click junkies out there, right? So I think there are a lot of people sitting in roles right now that are click junkies. They are, as much as they complain about admin, they love admin.
Well,
It's
a familiar and safe
It's
space.
comfortable.
It's comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is part of the challenge. And that's why we're talking to so many different people on different sides of impact within this series that David and I are doing, because, you know, we're talking to everyone from the people that are building the AI agents and, you know, developing new prompt departments in organizations, through to people who are focusing on human strengths. People who are focused on resilience in a really very uncertain work world at the moment. It's going to take all of those things.
Yeah. And I think just on that what last word that you used there in a lot of respects is uncertainty. Humanity really struggles with uncertainty. It is the number one thing that we struggle with as humans is uncertainty. And I think we're in an uncertain space on so many dimensions, you know, right now, not just the AI dimension. Obviously, there's all of everything else that's happening politically as well around the globe. But it's really tough. It's really tough. But I think, honestly, I actually think that we're entering into a really, really exciting time in humanity.
I feel like we're in a cocoon, Al, and we're about to jump out of it in the next 3 or 4
I think we
years,
are.
and we'll be the
Yeah.
most beautiful butterfly.
Yeah.
Because all the efficiency gains.
Do you
Everyone's
imagine the
jumped
amount of
on the
colourful clothes we're going to be wearing?
Exactly.
We'll be wearing black clothes.
We'll
like
have
we
so
are now,
much
right?
time on our hands. Well, it's been a fascinating episode. I really do.
I've learned a lot.
I've learnt a lot, and I'll be rewatching or re-listening because there was a lot said. I feel like we could break out into a number of different episodes.
I feel like this one episode could be 47 different blogs.
Oh God, really? Look, I've enjoyed the conversation as well. It's a big topic, and there are so many dimensions to it. I think what the last comment I will make is that my belief, and I think definitely our belief as a business as well, is when you think about AI, it needs to be about human forward. And if it's about driving humanity forward or humans forward in the right way, that's the right approach in terms of how you incorporate the impact of AI. If it's not driving that outcome, you should question, is it the right thing to do?
Love it. What a great place to wrap up this fantastic conversation. Thanks so much for coming in live in person to the studio
it's cool.
today, Alastair. Appreciate it.
No problems at all. It's
Thanks,
wonderful to be
Al.
here.